War is not an event, it is a series of moments where men decide whether to stand or fall. December 7, 1941, dawned like any other day in the Philippines, yet history was quietly preparing its most violent wake-up call. Across the Pacific, a single wave of destruction was heading straight toward the unsuspecting American and Filipino forces, and the man who would come to define the Pacific theater, General Douglas MacArthur, was about to face a test unlike any other. MacArthur, a towering figure with a sharp gaze and an unshakable confidence, had spent years preparing for a possible Japanese threat, but no amount of strategy could fully anticipate the ferocity of what was coming. The Japanese had struck Pearl Harbor just hours earlier, and the news rippled like an electric current through the Allied command. Ships had been sunk, planes reduced to twisted metal, and lives lost before breakfast. MacArthur received the news at his headquarters in Manila. The weight of responsibility bore down on him instantly. The Philippines was vulnerable, isolated, and ill-prepared for the scale of the assault. Thousands of American and Filipino soldiers looked to him not only for orders but for hope, and he knew that hope would be tested to its limits. Within hours, Japanese bombers appeared over the skies of Luzon, their engines roaring like thunder across the tropical islands. The ground shook beneath the relentless assault. MacArthur moved with precision, issuing commands, coordinating defenses, and trying to delay the inevitable. His troops fought valiantly, but the disparity in strength and preparation was stark. Fortifications were incomplete, equipment was limited, and the enemy's advance was methodical and merciless. Despite the overwhelming odds, MacArthur refused to succumb to despair. Every maneuver, every defensive position, was calculated with the knowledge that failure was not just a personal outcome, it would determine the fate of thousands under his command. By late December, the Japanese had begun their systematic occupation of the Philippines. MacArthur recognized that holding the islands intact against such a force was impossible without reinforcements that would never come in time. In the quiet moments before his departure, he addressed his staff, his voice calm but resolute. "I shall return," he promised, a statement that would echo through history as a beacon of determination and resilience. The words were more than a vow, they were a pledge to a nation, to an ally, and to every soldier left behind to endure the coming siege. MacArthur's journey to Australia was both strategic and symbolic. Leaving the Philippines meant abandoning his post, yet it also allowed him to regroup, to plan, and to eventually reclaim what had been lost. The flight south was tense, filled with reflection and the awareness that every moment counted. In Australia, MacArthur quickly assumed command of the Southwest Pacific area, transforming it into a hub of military planning and logistics. He understood that victory in the Pacific would not come from brute force alone, it would require strategy, patience, and the coordination of nations and resources spanning thousands of miles of ocean. While the Philippines endured occupation, MacArthur worked tirelessly to build the foundation for a counteroffensive. Supplies were gathered, troops were trained, and intelligence networks were strengthened. Every decision was imbued with the urgency of a theater in which time was both ally and enemy. The Americans and Australians under his command had to adapt to the harsh realities of jungle warfare, island hopping, and naval coordination. MacArthur's leadership style combined strict discipline with a deep understanding of human motivation. He inspired loyalty, often visiting troops on the front lines, demonstrating that he would not ask of others what he was not willing to do himself. The Pacific was a vast, unforgiving theater of war, stretching from the deserts of New Guinea to the coral reefs of the Philippines. Each island was a potential fortress, each sea a battlefield, and each engagement carried the weight of countless lives. MacArthur's strategy of island hopping was revolutionary in its audacity. Rather than attacking every Japanese stronghold, he chose key locations that would serve as stepping stones toward the ultimate goal, the liberation of the Philippines and, eventually, the defeat of Japan itself. This approach required careful planning, relentless intelligence gathering, and the ability to adapt on the fly. Failures could not be afforded, yet mistakes were inevitable in such an immense theater. MacArthur's genius was in turning these constraints into advantages, leveraging mobility, surprise, and morale to offset the enemy's strength. As months passed, news from the Philippines painted a grim picture. The Bataan Peninsula became a stage for heroism and tragedy alike. Soldiers fought in squalid conditions, facing hunger, disease, and relentless bombardment. MacArthur, thousands of miles away, carried the burden of command with a mix of anguish and resolve. His mind was never far from the men he had left behind, and his plans for return were executed with meticulous attention to timing and coordination. Every shipment of supplies, every reconnaissance mission, and every Allied victory in the region brought him closer to fulfilling his promise. The psychological impact of MacArthur's departure cannot be understated. For the Filipino people and the soldiers remaining in the Philippines, his presence had been a symbol of defiance against overwhelming odds. When he left, that symbol did not disappear, it transformed into a promise, a lifeline that sustained morale through the darkest days of occupation. Guerrilla resistance sprang up, coordinated by local forces and supported by Allied intelligence, demonstrating the enduring influence of MacArthur's leadership even in his absence. By mid-1942, the Pacific Campaign had taken on a new shape. American forces had regrouped, reinforced by Australian allies and supplemented with equipment shipped across the treacherous seas. MacArthur's command structure emphasized flexibility and rapid response, understanding that in the Pacific, speed and surprise were as lethal as artillery and armor. The logistics alone were staggering, transporting troops, tanks, planes, and supplies across thousands of miles of ocean required coordination that tested the limits of military planning. Yet under MacArthur, it worked. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The stage was set for the next phase of the war. MacArthur's return to the Philippines would not be merely a tactical maneuver, it would be a moral victory, a fulfillment of a promise that had inspired nations. His leadership had transformed despair into hope, inaction into strategy, and retreat into preparation for a decisive counteroffensive. The Pacific theater was now a complex chessboard, and MacArthur was determined to checkmate an enemy that had once seemed unstoppable. In retrospect, the early months of the Pacific War demonstrated both the peril of underestimating an enemy and the power of resilient leadership. MacArthur's decisions during this period shaped the trajectory of the entire conflict. His evacuation, far from being a retreat, was a strategic repositioning that preserved the core of Allied power in the Pacific. His promise to return became a rallying cry, binding soldiers and civilians together with a shared vision of liberation. In the midst of chaos and devastation, one man's resolve would become the axis around which an entire theater of war revolved. The rising storm in the Pacific was only beginning. Battles would rage across islands, oceans, and jungles. Countless lives would be lost. Yet as the sun set over the islands of the Philippines and rose over the Australian mainland, one truth remained undeniable: General Douglas MacArthur was not merely a commander in war, he was a symbol of unwavering determination, a strategist whose vision stretched beyond the immediate horizon, and a man whose promise to return would shape the destiny of nations. Guided by fire, no repetition, fresh story, full cinematic chapter 2 in continuous narrative style, 1,000 to 1,100 words, English, focusing on MacArthur's counteroffensive and Pacific battles. Return to the Philippines. * Promises in war are more than words, they are lifelines carried across oceans and fire. October 20, 1944, dawned over the tropical waters of Leyte Gulf, and with it came the long-awaited moment that General Douglas MacArthur had promised for over 2 years. The Pacific had been a vast and brutal theater, stretching from the jungles of New Guinea to the scattered islands of the Philippines, and now, at last, the tide of war was turning. MacArthur's return was not merely symbolic, it was the culmination of meticulous planning, relentless preparation, and an unyielding vision to restore what had been lost. The journey across the Pacific was a testament to Allied ingenuity and perseverance. Thousands of ships carried troops, tanks, artillery, and supplies, navigating waters teeming with hidden threats. Japanese submarines and aircraft prowled the sea, yet the convoy advanced, shielded by Allied naval strength and the precise timing of MacArthur's strategy. On the morning of landing, the air was thick with anticipation. Soldiers, many of them having endured years of training and combat elsewhere in the Pacific, readied themselves for the battle that would define the liberation of their homeland. MacArthur himself stood aboard the flagship, surveying the horizon with the calm determination that had become his trademark. The weight of history pressed upon him, yet he exuded an air of confidence born of experience and foresight. The landing at Leyte was met with fierce resistance. Japanese forces, entrenched and prepared, unleashed artillery and machine gun fire as the Allied soldiers approached the beaches. MacArthur's strategy, honed over years of observation and calculation, emphasized coordination between land, sea, and air. Bombardments softened enemy positions, while naval gunfire suppressed counterattacks. Air superiority, achieved through relentless campaigns over the preceding months, ensured that Japanese reinforcements were delayed or destroyed before they could reach the front lines. Every element of the plan relied on precision, timing, and the morale of men who understood the stakes. Amid the chaos, MacArthur's presence became a source of inspiration. Soldiers who had grown weary of endless campaigns saw in him the embodiment of perseverance. His iconic words, spoken as he stepped onto Philippine soil, resonated like a thunderclap. People of the Philippines, I have returned. The phrase carried the weight of a promise fulfilled and rekindled hope among both the troops and civilians who had endured occupation and oppression for years. The liberation of Leyte was not merely a tactical victory, it was a declaration that resilience and determination could overcome even the most daunting adversities. The battles that followed were grueling. Japanese forces, though increasingly isolated, fought with desperate ferocity. The rugged terrain of the Philippines' dense jungles, mountain ranges, and narrow rivers transformed every skirmish into a test of endurance and ingenuity. MacArthur emphasized mobility and adaptability, ensuring that his commanders could respond to shifting conditions. Supply lines, often stretched across treacherous waters and hostile terrain, were carefully maintained, reflecting his understanding that logistics were as crucial as firepower. Every victory was hard-won, each advancement measured in meters rather than miles. Leyte Gulf also marked one of the most decisive naval engagements of the Pacific War. The Japanese Imperial Navy, attempting to repel the invasion, clashed with Allied forces in a battle that would cripple Japan's ability to project power across the region. Aircraft carriers, battleships, and destroyers clashed in a deadly symphony of fire and steel. MacArthur, though not directly commanding the naval forces, coordinated closely with Admiral Halsey and other commanders to ensure that landings and reinforcements proceeded unimpeded. The destruction of Japanese naval strength in Leyte Gulf allowed the Allies to maintain momentum, setting the stage for subsequent operations across the archipelago. As the campaign progressed, MacArthur demonstrated a keen understanding of both strategy and psychology. He knew that reclaiming the Philippines required more than military victories, it demanded the hearts and minds of the local population. Civilian support, facilitated through coordination with local guerrilla fighters, provided intelligence and logistical assistance that proved invaluable. Villages liberated from Japanese control were immediately stabilized, with food, medical care, and protection provided by Allied forces. MacArthur's approach reflected his belief that the purpose of warfare extended beyond defeating armies. It was about restoring dignity, security, and governance to occupied lands. The liberation of Leyte was only the beginning. Subsequent campaigns targeted Luzon, Mindoro, and other key islands, each presenting unique challenges. Jungle warfare demanded new tactics, and MacArthur encouraged flexibility among his commanders. Engineers built bridges, cleared obstacles, and established supply depots, while artillery and air strikes were carefully timed to minimize civilian casualties. Japanese forces, increasingly cornered, resorted to defensive strongholds, ambushes, and kamikaze attacks. Yet the combination of strategic foresight, superior logistics, and unrelenting pressure allowed MacArthur's forces to steadily advance, island by island, inch by inch. Amid these operations, MacArthur maintained a meticulous balance between authority and presence. He frequently visited front lines, inspecting positions, speaking with soldiers, and adjusting plans in real time. His hands-on approach instilled confidence among commanders and troops alike, reinforcing the principle that leadership was both a matter of planning and personal courage. Stories circulated among the men of his calm demeanor under fire, his ability to anticipate enemy moves, and his unwavering commitment to fulfilling the promise made years earlier in the Philippines. By early 1945, the Philippines were largely liberated. Manila, the capital, became a focal point of fierce urban combat, with streets reduced to rubble and civilians caught between retreating Japanese forces and advancing Allied troops. MacArthur's strategy emphasized minimizing unnecessary destruction while achieving military objectives. Engineers cleared debris, medical teams treated the wounded, and local governance structures were re-established. Each liberated district became a testament to the integration of military success and humanitarian care, a reflection of MacArthur's broader vision of what victory should represent. The return to the Philippines underscored a transformation in both the Pacific theater and MacArthur himself. He had moved from a position of retreat and survival to one of decisive action and liberation. His reputation as a strategist, a commander, and a symbol of hope solidified across the Pacific. Allies and adversaries alike recognized his ability to combine tactical acumen with psychological insight, turning the geography of the islands into an extension of his strategic mind. As Allied forces prepared for the final push toward Japan, the lessons of the Philippine campaign resonated deeply. MacArthur had demonstrated that victory in the Pacific required more than firepower, it required patience, innovation, and the ability to inspire both soldiers and civilians. His return was a testament to the power of promise and perseverance, illustrating that in war, leadership is measured not by the battles fought alone, but by the hope sustained, the lives preserved, and the ground reclaimed. In the end, the islands of the Philippines stood liberated not merely because of strategy or strength, but because one man had refused to forget his pledge. The promise of return had become a reality, shaping the course of the Pacific War and leaving an enduring mark on history. MacArthur's vision, determination, and leadership had turned despair into action, isolation into coordination, and defeat into the first steps toward ultimate victory. Island hopping and the final push. In the vastness of the Pacific, victory favors those who move with both precision and courage. By early 1943, the war in the Pacific had entered a new phase. General Douglas MacArthur, stationed in the Southwest Pacific, faced the immense challenge of advancing toward Japan through a labyrinth of islands, reefs, and treacherous waters. The Japanese had fortified positions across the archipelago, turning each island into a potential tomb for invading forces. Yet MacArthur's mind, always several steps ahead, had conceived a plan that combined audacity with strategy, a campaign of selective assault, known famously as island hopping. The goal was not to conquer every enemy position, but to strike at critical points, cutting off Japanese supply lines, isolating strongholds, and moving steadily toward the ultimate prize, the liberation of the Philippines and the defeat of Japan. The first stages of this campaign were a test of endurance, logistics, and ingenuity. New Guinea became a proving ground for MacArthur's approach. Dense jungles, steep mountains, and disease-ridden swamps created a battlefield unlike any other. Troops faced malaria, tropical fever, and starvation in addition to relentless enemy fire. Supply lines were vulnerable to ambushes, and air support often had to navigate unpredictable weather. Yet MacArthur's leadership ensured that every challenge was met with careful planning. Engineers carved roads, constructed airstrips in hostile territory, and built bridges over rivers that were otherwise impassable. Each successful landing and advance became a lesson in adaptation, proving that determination could match the most unforgiving terrain. The campaign in New Guinea was not just a matter of brute force. Intelligence and reconnaissance played a critical role. MacArthur employed a network of scouts, local informants, and guerrilla fighters who knew the terrain intimately. Their information allowed Allied forces to avoid ambushes, locate hidden Japanese encampments, and prioritize targets for maximum impact. Coordination between ground troops, naval support, and air units required a level of precision rarely seen in the Pacific theater. Each operation, while physically grueling, was orchestrated like a symphony of military strategy, reflecting MacArthur's meticulous attention to detail and understanding of warfare as a multidimensional contest. Meanwhile, morale remained a central concern. MacArthur understood that victory depended not only on strategy but also on the resolve of his soldiers. He maintained a visible presence across the theater, visiting forward positions, inspecting supply lines, and engaging with men who faced daily peril. His appearances inspired confidence and determination. Even in the darkest moments when ambushes inflicted heavy casualties or weather-delayed operations, MacArthur's leadership provided a psychological anchor. Soldiers believed not only in the mission but in the man who led them. As the island-hopping campaign progressed, the Allied forces captured strategic locations across the Pacific, Hollandia, Biak, and Merida, each serving as a staging ground for the next assault. Airfields established on these islands allowed bombing campaigns against Japanese positions further north, gradually dismantling enemy capabilities. Naval supremacy, gained through months of coordinated operations, ensured that reinforcements and supplies could move safely across vast distances. MacArthur's strategy of selective engagement minimized unnecessary casualties while maintaining relentless pressure on Japanese forces. It was a delicate balance, one that demanded constant vigilance, creativity, and leadership. By mid-1944, the final push toward the Philippines resumed with renewed vigor. Leyte had already been secured, but Luzon remained a formidable objective. The island's mountainous terrain, dense forests, and fortified cities challenged even the most experienced commanders. Japanese forces, aware of MacArthur's determination, adopted desperate defensive measures, including suicide attacks, booby traps, and counter-offensives designed to slow the Allied advance. Yet each obstacle was met with ingenuity. Amphibious landings bypassed heavily defended ports, artillery and air support softened entrenched positions, and coordinated advances ensured that no single unit became isolated or overextended. The liberation of Luzon also required careful attention to civilians. MacArthur understood that urban warfare, if conducted recklessly, could result in catastrophic loss of life. Engineers and medical teams accompanied advancing troops, clearing debris, establishing field hospitals, and distributing food and supplies. Villages liberated from Japanese control were quickly stabilized, with Allied officers overseeing the restoration of local governance. MacArthur's approach reflected a philosophy that victory was not merely measured in enemy casualties but in the restoration of order, security, and hope to occupied populations. Throughout the campaign, MacArthur's relationship with his subordinate commanders was both disciplined and collaborative. He demanded excellence, but he also trusted the expertise of those who executed operations on the ground. Frequent briefings, updates, and strategic discussions ensured that everyone understood their role in the broader plan. This combination of centralized vision and decentralized execution allowed the Allies to respond flexibly to the unpredictable challenges of the Pacific theater. Every successful landing, every captured island, was a testament to this synergy. As 1945 approached, the island-hopping campaign had transformed the Pacific theater. Japanese forces were increasingly isolated, their supply lines severed, and their capacity to launch large-scale operations severely diminished. MacArthur's strategy had achieved its primary objectives, critical positions had been captured, momentum had been maintained, and the path toward the liberation of remaining occupied territories, including key parts of the Philippines, was clear. The campaign had also demonstrated the integration of air, land, and naval power, setting a precedent for modern military operations. Amidst the victories, MacArthur never lost sight of the human cost of war. Soldiers and civilians alike endured unimaginable hardships, and the general's directives consistently emphasized minimizing unnecessary suffering. Hospitals, relief operations, and civil administration were not afterthoughts but integral components of every campaign. MacArthur believed that true victory required not only defeating the enemy but also preserving the moral and social fabric of the liberated regions. The final months of the Pacific Island hopping campaign set the stage for the ultimate confrontation with Japan. By the time Allied forces had secured positions across the key islands, they had gained not only territory but also invaluable experience in logistics, coordination, and combined arms operations. Each island became a stepping stone, each operation a lesson, and each victory a reinforcement of the promise MacArthur had made years earlier. Through island after island, battle after battle, one theme remained constant: determination in the face of overwhelming odds. MacArthur's vision, executed with meticulous strategy, inspired millions. Soldiers who had witnessed years of retreat now advanced with purpose, civilians began to rebuild lives interrupted by occupation, and the Allied momentum in the Pacific was undeniable. The stage was now set for the climactic final operations that would bring the war to Japan's doorstep. In the vast theater of the Pacific, MacArthur had proven that strategic ingenuity, leadership, and perseverance could overcome formidable natural and human obstacles. The island-hopping campaign was more than a military strategy, it was a testament to human endurance, the power of foresight, and the realization that even across thousands of miles of ocean and hostile terrain, a determined commander could turn a scattered collection of islands into a path toward victory. Victory, surrender, and legacy. The end of a war is not merely the silence of guns, but the beginning of rebuilding a world shattered by them. August 15, 1945, dawned with a surreal quiet across the Pacific. After years of relentless fighting, amphibious assaults, and the painstaking advance from island to island, the war that had consumed millions of lives was drawing to a close. The Japanese surrender was imminent, and General Douglas MacArthur, who had spent years orchestrating the liberation of the Philippines and coordinating Allied operations across the Pacific, prepared to assume a role that would redefine his legacy. The transition from battlefield commander to overseer of post-war reconstruction demanded a vision as disciplined and strategic as the campaigns that had brought victory. MacArthur arrived in Tokyo on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, the site of Japan's formal surrender. The deck of the battleship was transformed into a stage of historical gravity, adorned with flags of the Allied nations, each symbolizing years of sacrifice and struggle. As MacArthur stepped forward to accept the surrender on behalf of the Allied powers, the eyes of the world focused on him. This moment, broadcast across continents, marked the culmination of a military career that had navigated setbacks, retreats, and triumphs, and now faced a new challenge: ensuring that peace would endure in a nation steeped in militarism and defeat. The surrender ceremonies were not merely symbolic, they were the opening act of a complex and unprecedented occupation. MacArthur assumed supreme command over Japan, tasked with overseeing disarmament, demilitarization, and the creation of political and economic stability. The logistical challenge was enormous. Cities lay in ruins, industries had been destroyed, and millions of civilians faced starvation, disease, and displacement. Yet MacArthur approached these challenges with the same meticulous planning and strategic insight that had defined his military campaigns. Civil administration, relief distribution, and the rebuilding of infrastructure became intertwined with the principles of governance and societal reform. One of MacArthur's earliest initiatives was to dismantle Japan's military-industrial complex while simultaneously preserving the nation's capacity for essential production. Factories that had produced weapons were converted to civilian purposes, and strict controls were implemented to prevent the resurgence of militarism. At the same time, he encouraged the rehabilitation of schools, hospitals, and transportation systems, understanding that societal stability was inseparable from national security. The challenge was to create an environment where a defeated nation could not only survive but eventually thrive under democratic principles. Political reform became another cornerstone of MacArthur's post-war strategy. Working with Japanese leaders, he oversaw the drafting of a new constitution that enshrined democracy, individual rights, and the renunciation of war as a sovereign policy. The 1947 Constitution of Japan, known for its Article 9, reflected MacArthur's belief that lasting peace required structural change and the empowerment of citizens. Though initially met with skepticism from some quarters, these reforms gradually fostered political stability, laying the foundation for Japan's transformation into a modern democratic state. MacArthur also prioritized economic recovery. He recognized that political reform without material stability would be fragile. Agricultural programs were initiated to address food shortages, while industrial output was carefully revived under Allied supervision. Land reforms redistributed property from large landlords to tenant farmers, empowering communities and reducing social inequality. Education programs emphasized democratic values, literacy, and civic responsibility, aiming to cultivate a generation capable of sustaining the reforms and contributing to national recovery. Every initiative reflected MacArthur's understanding that the end of war required not only peace treaties but practical measures to ensure long-term stability. Cultural and social reforms accompanied political and economic changes. MacArthur encouraged freedom of the press, labor rights, and gender equality. He understood that rebuilding a nation's morale was as critical as restoring its infrastructure. Public ceremonies, cultural preservation, and education programs were supported to foster a sense of normalcy and collective identity. MacArthur's presence was both administrative and symbolic. He represented accountability, order, and the promise that a devastated nation could rise again through disciplined effort and ethical governance. Despite the enormity of his responsibilities, MacArthur maintained a disciplined schedule, balancing oversight with personal engagement. He toured cities, visited hospitals, and met with Japanese leaders to assess progress and address challenges directly. His leadership style combined authority with approachability, ensuring that directives were enforced while fostering cooperation and mutual understanding. Soldiers under his command adapted from combat roles to administrative and peacekeeping functions, demonstrating flexibility and resilience that mirrored MacArthur's own approach to leadership. The broader implications of MacArthur's administration extended beyond Japan. His success provided a model for post-conflict governance and reconstruction in modern warfare. By combining strategic foresight, logistical expertise, and ethical governance, he demonstrated that victory on the battlefield must be followed by careful, principled stewardship. Lessons from his tenure informed future military and humanitarian operations worldwide, establishing the precedent that peace requires planning, compassion, and sustained leadership. MacArthur's legacy, however, was not without controversy. Critics questioned the extent of Allied influence on Japan's internal affairs and debated the balance between imposed reforms and indigenous decision-making. Yet, decades later, the transformative effects of his administration were undeniable. A nation that had been shattered by war emerged politically stable, economically resilient, and integrated into the global community. MacArthur's role in shaping this outcome underscored the idea that military leadership extends beyond combat. It encompasses vision, foresight, and the capacity to guide societies from destruction to renewal. As he departed Japan in 1951, MacArthur left behind a nation fundamentally changed by his oversight. The Pacific War, with its battles of islands, jungles, and oceans, had ended. The devastation it wrought had been immense, yet MacArthur's post-war leadership ensured that its survivors had a future built on hope, stability, and opportunity. History would remember him not only as a brilliant military strategist but also as a figure capable of bridging the chasm between wartime command and peacetime reconstruction. Ultimately, the story of MacArthur in the Pacific is a testament to resilience, vision, and the enduring impact of leadership. From the early retreats to the painstaking advances across islands, the return to the Philippines, and the orchestration of Japan's surrender and recovery. His life during World War II and its aftermath reflects the extraordinary capacity of one individual to shape events on a scale that few could imagine. Victory, he understood, was not an endpoint but a foundation upon which a new era could be built, a world where the echoes of war would give way to the promise of peace.